Welcome to a new series that I wanted to cover called the Boris Tip of the Week. I wanted to once a week go back to some old tips that were great tips but newer players might not have experienced. In this video, we're going to be going over KvK training bastions. The training bastion gives you 110,000 points, which means you need to get 11,000 troops of T4 or 5,500 troops of T5. There's a couple ways to do this, but the biggest way is to use expansions and just wait them out. For T5, the best option is generally just go with the 5,000 expansion, because then you can complete 3 of the bastions with the 3 different buildings you're going to be training from. But with T4, to get 11,000 troops, you have some options. If you use all 3 buildings on 2,000 expansions, that'll get you there. Or 2 buildings on 5,000 expansions each will also get you there. Doing this several days in advance or waiting to start the troops till you're almost done will save you a bunch of speed ups, and it will pay off in the long run. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In today's episode, we are covering how to heal effectively without using speed ups. There are 2 main ways to do this. The first is the 90-minute rule. What you'll want to do is while you're online up to 20 times a day, you can heal 90 minutes worth of troops for free. If you start the healing and ask for help at 90 minutes of healing, it'll remove 3 minutes per help up to 30 times, so down to 90 minutes, and basically give you those 90 minutes worth of healing for free. After that, what you'll want to do is plan yourself to be about 30 to 35% longer than you're away. For example, in a day where I'm going to be gone for 12 hours, if I set it for 35% longer than that, or about 16 and some change, the 30 helps that come in will then reduce it back down to 12. What that does is gives me an extra 4 hours of speed ups that I didn't have to use any speed ups on. Using these 2 in pairs can save you a bunch of speed ups and keep you in the fight for longer. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, we're covering Kahar chaining, one of my favorite things to do in Rise of Kingdoms. And this consists of trying to save AP by fighting multiple Kahars. You can do this with any AoE commander. Circle AoEs work better than triangular, but both work ultimately. So in this example, I'm using Artemisia YSG for the double AoE. And my goal here is to hit as many of these other Kahars as possible with the AoE, so that it aggroes them. And what that does is it gets them attacking me, and now I don't have to attack them and use the 200 AP that I did before. And doing this, as you can see, I pulled 5 marches at once. The overall goal of this is to just save as much AP as possible. Obviously, the stronger commanders you can use, the better. I used Artemisia YSG here to show how effective it can be, but obviously it's a little fragile. Ultimately, you want to pick a commander that's strong for you, and that's able to take the damage, but can save you a bunch of the AP in the process. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. And this week we are talking about the Wheel of Fortune. The Wheel of Fortune is one of my favorite events because it gives you some guaranteed rewards, it gives you statistics, and me being a big fan of math, it allows me to combine those 2 to give options as to what your best possible rewards are. So here are a couple tips to help you succeed in those events. First, you want to always use those free spins, and if you can help to use the 400 spins, use those on at least 2 of the 3 days. That'll get you 5 total spins for 800 gems, which will get you halfway to your 10, a fifth of the way to your 25, and so on and so forth. Next, you want to make sure that you spin to a reward tier, 10, 25, and so on. Typically, 10 and 25 are the ones you're going to want to go to most often, but you can go to the higher tiers so long as you stop on them. And lastly, just make sure that you do this in moderation. You don't want to run yourself dry on gems right before a More Than Gems event. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, I'm going to talk about why rally sizes are sometimes limited. Some kingdoms will limit rally sizes to try to help maximize rewards, and here's how. With a rally, it doesn't matter if you use 10 marches to clear it or 5. If it is defeated, you get the same plunder from the overall chests. Because of that, if you can use 1,000,000 troops to clear a fort that you were using 2 million to, if you were to split it for the same amount of AP, you'd get double the chests. So what some kingdoms will do is limit it to 1 million or 800,000 in KvK or 400,000 in Home Kingdom. And the goal of this is to create more rallies, to create more boxes, and create more of the Treasure of the Blue Crystal, or whatever crystal you happen to have, which can give you a ton of extra speed ups. And this can add up when you have a 150 person alliance that are all doing this. So keep it in mind for your future. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In today's episode, we're talking about why Garrison Tree has such little utilization. Overall, when you see Garrison investments, you'll see these three talents are the main talents. Sometimes you'll see it go to here, but it's typically the exception rather than the rule. And the reason is that a lot of these other talents are based on being the city's defense or based on being in your city in general. This means that you waste a lot of those talents in defending an objective that you would otherwise be able to use on your red tree or your blue tree to get more value. Because of that, and because of the fact that typically speaking, the best way to protect your city is not to have a good garrison, is to not be rallied at all. And you'll see that there's a good reason to not have that much investment. And you add on the fact that these blue trees and red trees are typically better in terms of value as well, and you have just another reason that the Garrison Tree tends to have such little investment. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In today's episode, we're talking about civilizations and which ones you should be using. Typically, for cavalry, you have a couple of options. Arabia is the standard for rally because you get the rally damage, while Germany and the Byzantines are also good options for the field because you get a lot of the extra bonuses. Alternatively, for archers, the Ottoman Empire tends to be the overall because of the skill damage, but Egypt also sees a good amount of use rate. For infantry, you have several options. France is an extremely popular one for rally and garrison, while you have the Vikings as well that are good options, and Rome will see a lot of options for free-to-play or for field-heavy players. Greece is another one that tends to see some use, especially for rallies, because the rallied army damage is such a big deal. And this is typically what you'll see most of the heavy rally players using. But you'll see some of the ones that are heavy rally, field, and garrison also using France. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, we are talking about city chaining. Your flag or your fort is the defensive front of your defense. Ultimately, its success hinges upon the ability to reinforce it quickly. While field control is the easiest way to do that, in the case that it doesn't, or in the case that you need to just get extra marches that aren't your pristine field marches to the front, city chaining is the way to do that. And really, the tactic comes down to this. You want to get cities as close to the flag as possible, while also allowing for alternate paths. For example, in this setup, it is a solid chain, but this gives you an alternative way to attack it from the left instead of just from the right. This gives you alternate paths. If you're retreating, you can send a city into a side city while you bring the fresh marches to the front. And you can do all this with or without field control. So ultimately, you'll want to make sure that you have this city chain set up quickly and efficiently. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, we're talking about choosing formations. Choosing formations is something that seems super complicated at first, but in the early game, you should just focus on whatever you can get the best stats for. Because good stats on your armaments and good inscriptions on your armaments are better than the small amount of bonus you get. Once you start working into specialty inscriptions, however, you'll want to start focusing. Wedge formation is ideal for any skill-based damage dealers, arch for any normal damage-based damage dealers, echelon for anybody who provides percentage-based buffs, hollow square for commanders that have shields, testado for commanders who have shields and heals, and circle formation for commanders who provide heavy amounts of heals. Ultimately, you'll want to pick the one that fits your commander's playstyle best, and sometimes you'll have several, like Joan Prime, who can use echelon, arch, or wedge, and triple line. A big challenge in Wheel of Fortune is trying not to overspend your gems for more than gems. Due to both having free sculptures just for spending gems, here's how to quickly decide when to spend and when not to. First, if you can get to the next tier on Wheel of Fortune within 10 spins, the wheel is the better option so long as you're pursuing that specific commander. 10 spins will cost 7,200 gems, and each reward tier is a minimum of 5 gold heads, either universal or specific, making it a better option. Add on a good chance to at least get another sculpture or two, and you just get more value. Second, if you're not working on a specific commander, save for more than gems instead. You should still use your free and discounted spins and maybe even go to 10, but if you have 7,000 gems or more, the universal sculptures are a better value because you have more flexibility to choose what to spend them on. Lastly, if you're unsure, save in general. There's no rule saying you have to spend on either. So if you're worried, just hold out and maybe you'll have more clarity at the next cycle. There's nothing that says you have to spend them right this second. Here are the best Mightiest Governor commanders for leadership. And first, we have Hera. Hera is still the top dog of mixed garrisons, and he's set to be for quite some time. With his ridiculous normal damage resistances, which are made even more important by the new rally being a smite damage, and making the rare normal damage resistances more important than ever. And second, we have Lapu. While Lapu is a solid secondary side grade to Hera, the trade's tankiness for raw damage, he's still a great player in the Garrison meta on his own, especially in forts and passes where you have the field or you can control the amount of people attacking him. And last, and well, certainly least, is Moctezuma. Moctezuma makes this list not because he's actually great, but because outside of Hera and Lapu, there's really not much that's viable. And he does have a little bit of viability for farming forts. But honestly, if you're not going for Hera and Lapu, it's best to sit these Mightiest Governor events out. Here are the current best Mightiest Governor commanders for infantry. First, we have the new Scipio Aemilianus. While not out yet as of the recording of this video, if he is released anywhere near the kit we have seen in the releases, he'll be a major player in the rally meta and maybe even the field meta, with a massive damage vulnerability and great tankiness from normal damage. Next, we have Gorgo. Gorgo is the flagship infantry garrison right now. It is an anchor of the garrison meta in general, solidifying her spot on this list and cementing normal damage garrisons for the meta. Last, but certainly not least, we have Zenobia. While she is not necessarily as good as Gorgo, and I would have liked to have put Tariq here, it could very well be possible that with Scipio and William, Tariq will be unseated entirely in the rally meta, while Zenobia and Gorgo do still make an excellent garrison pair for those who do not already have Constantine built. Here are the current best Mightiest Governor commanders for archers. First, we have Asher. Asher is still a beast, and even with Scipio Aemilianus and William Wallace on the horizon, Asher is still poised to be absolutely terrifying to garrisons for some time to come, if not even beat the new infantry rallies as a counter rally option. In second, we have Henry. Henry is still an excellent pair for Asher, and it's no wonder he's on the list, as the emergence of the new infantry rallies will only solidify the strength of those archer counter rallies, and Henry's ability to resist swarming if the enemy does happen to have the field. Last, but certainly not least, is Dido. Dido isn't the powerhouse of the other two commanders on this list, but she is still a very solid option, and she is no slouch. And maybe getting some help in the next archer cycle to help keep her relevant and healthy in the infantry heavy meta, which may need a little more desperately with Scipio Aemilianus on the way. Here are my 3 favorite Season of Conquest KvK formats in Rise of Kingdoms. Please note that these are only Season of Conquest and will not include any of the formats we have not played. In first place, by a mile, is Siege of Orleans. I love the player agency of the auxiliary skills, and Siege of Orleans gives you as much agency as you could ever want, with plenty of variety and freedom of choice with your auxiliaries, allowing you to get some of your craziest lineups and just go wild with them. Next, we have King of the Nile. Although this is a pretty strange one, and it's definitely not a recovery KvK, it was a pretty fun format, and very forgiving for losing early zones. Seasonal Strategies also gives you some variety, while also is not terribly limited like Heroic Anthem is. Last, but certainly not least, is Strife of the 8. Everyone loves a little chaos, and Strife has chaos in spades. 8 camps, plenty of opportunities to wage war in every way imaginable, from frontal warfare to flanking maneuvers, and even a splash of farm hunting. There's room for everything in Strife. Here's why damage reduction is much more impactful than it may appear in Rise of Kingdoms. Damage reduction is a significant factor in building commanders in Rise of Kingdoms, but it is a much more significant factor than it may seem at a glance. In the damage factor heavy focus of many players, the focus tends to be on damage dealt increases, which are great, but it sometimes understates the significance of damage reduction, particularly all damage reduction. Damage reduction works similarly to health or defense, in that it reduces damage taken, which reduces unit losses. This means that a troop will stay alive longer, but it also means that you'll have more troops alive to counterattack, or use a skill back, both of which are boosted heavily by troop count already. This means that, in a way, damage reduction increases damage dealt indirectly, making it double dip in the benefit. While it's not a 100% 1-to-1 ratio, it also reduces lost troops, reduces healing bills, and is generally just extremely important for field and garrisons, and especially for garrison. When it comes to garrisons, you have a lot of options for damage reduction. You have all damage reduction, you have normal damage reduction, and you have skill damage reduction. In today's video for garrisons, I want to cover my general priority in terms of which I want to have more of. Generally speaking, all damage is probably the best. It's not necessarily as good individually as normal damage or skill damage, but it gives you better coverage and brings up your average, which is super, super important to keeping your trade more even. On top of the fact that the general drop off is much lower than you might anticipate, this is great. Second, we have normal damage reduction. This is better since the swarm heavy meta is so prevalent right now, and it's pretty much going to be better overall because of the sheer amount of swarmers. And the more people that swarm, the better the normal damage reduction becomes. Last but certainly not least, we have skill damage, which is still great 1v1, but it's just in the swarm heavy meta not nearly as impactful. Here's the main differences between flags and forts in a defensive capacity. While both are beneficial, they have their own benefits and drawbacks for use when setting up territory in war. First, forts. Forts have the benefits of having massive health reserves and massive capacity, being harder for the enemies to burn in the first place and harder for them to burn down fully, allowing plenty of time to regroup, counterpush, and generally being solid as a defensive line, and making it a nightmare for your enemy to burn you out. It makes a great anchor point. However, forts have huge build times and are extremely vulnerable during that time, making it more of a conservative choice to place it, even though you can place it wherever. On the other side, flags are much quicker to build, much less expensive, making them great for aggressive pushes and quick territory, but have smaller capacity, lower burn times, and limited placement, while forts can be placed anywhere, flags have to touch other territory, making them more forgiving but less flexible choice for defenders. When it comes to leadership garrisons, one of the top questions I get is how to set up the pair. So in today's video, I wanted to cover that. You have two main ways to do this. First is the specialty mix. This is your Jan Hera, Gorgo Hera, etc. This can also be a fully mixed garrison pair with a single troop type gear. In this case, you'll want to maximize the unit specific bonuses. So you want to have as close to 100% of that unit as possible while maintaining 3 unit types for your commander. To do this, you'll want 60 to 70% of your main troop type with 15 to 20% of each other. For example, Jan Hera will be 60 to 70% Cavs, and then 15 to 20% of the other two. The allied fill should be his main troop type though. Next is the fully mixed defense. This has leadership gear and double mixed commanders. In this case, you'll want any proportion. However, you want to make sure you have at least 20% of each troop type. If you have a lot of armaments for a specific troop type, you can run closer to 50% of that, but otherwise, you can run as close to even as possible, even 33, 33, 33. Here are 3 no-stress garrisons for new garrison mains, or for developing kingdoms. While these are not the be-all, end-all in the meta, they are solid, flexible pairs that get good, solid trades, while being forgiving for newer kingdoms learning to reinforce structures. First is Hera YSS. This is a flexible garrison. When you build leadership gear, this march can take whatever troops whenever needed, allowing you to fill quickly and effectively as long as you keep the quality of the troops high, making a great option that is surprisingly strong. This may also have Lapu Lapu eventually, depending on your preference. Next, we have Jan Hera. This is similarly flexible, but with the caveat that you still want to have a hefty majority of cavalry. But it takes mixed troops fairly well to the point that you don't need to be perfectly reinforced to get good trades. Lastly, we have Zeno or Gorgo with Hera. While Gorgo Zeno is relatively inflexible due to needing all infantry, pairing either Hera with either of these makes a great solid pair. With the release of Belisarius Prime, I wanted to touch base on how I personally determine the viability of commanders in Rise of Kingdoms. Since there are a lot of stats to consider, I try to simplify it down into 3 categories. First, how survivable is the commander? Sure, damage is great, but that damage does nothing if you're melted the second the enemy touches you. So just look at Khan, for example. Survivability means more fighting, no matter the role, and should be your first priority. Second, we have damage. Survivability is the priority, but no damage means you have nothing to do besides stand there and throw out normal attacks. So damage is a must as well. Last, but certainly not least, we have the unmeasurables, whether it's not as really survivability or damage. Buffs, debuffs, support, and other minor items that are conveniences are not specifically survivable. Can be good to determine viability, but only really outside of the first 2, which is why Sid has an insane disable and one of the best supports in the game, and is still fairly useless. Here's why relics tend to not make good rally and garrison commanders. In relic department, all the best relics tend to be for field commanders or field-specific uses of commanders. Think Alexander, YSG, Mehmed, Mulan, and more. But not one of them has been really made into a viable rally or garrison commander. This is because of the sheer power creep that garrisons and rallies have. While field marches have progressed, a relic on a field commander can still be useful on a second or third march, while a garrison or rally needs to be the best possible. That 5% difference in strength is a huge deal. which could be tens or hundreds of thousands of additional losses. This is mostly due to how much more quickly rallies and garrisons are in an arms race, with each getting increasingly more powerful to counter the others. But they do have increasing powers, but they have the benefit of having 5 merchants in the field, meaning you don't have to have one dictating pairing only, and you have more flexibility. Overall, it does make some sense though, because the field's a lot more flexible. Here's where William Wallace's passive speed cleanse and shield may be much stronger than initially thought. William Wallace's expertise is a passive that removes speed reductions when hit with a slowdown, and gives a shield. It also triggers on a skill use, but in reality it could completely counter 2 different talent trees. The speed reduction trigger sounds pretty simple. When you look at the support tree and mobility tree, both have talents that make the primary skill use slow down the enemy's hit. This means that the slow would then trigger the shield, which would then protect the commander from the secondary commander skill use partially. This could essentially negate many of the commander's bonuses that you get from the support tree with the slowdown, as you'll then mitigate some of the secondary commander's damage. Overall, this could be, on paper, very small, but in reality it impacts a lot of the Cav meta with Belisarius Prime, Joan Prime, Quo, and more all having slows, as well as affecting Herman Prime and Boudica Prime, who have their own slows on their talent trees. Overall, this could be a huge game changer for his viability in the field when you look at it. With the release of Scipio Aemilianus and William Wallace coming, there is a potential danger for a popular commander. Scipio and William Wallace are both going to be huge impacts on the current meta, whether you're talking about field or rally. But because of their normal damage-heavy kits, there's one commander that may be seeing a downturn and falling behind, and that is Trajan. Trajan's main skill, and the reason for using him, is a boost to skill damage dealt. This is great for throwing out more skill damage for up to 5 nearby allies, but it has the added drawback of taking more damage, and the increased prevalence of smite damage commanders may see this slowly narrowing his niche. While this is not a wholesale loss for Trajan, he will still be viable in some ways. It does signal that he may be taking a heavy downturn as more commander releases are happening, particularly if the smite commanders start to hit archers and cavalry. Because of this, it may cause some issues with Trajan's true effectiveness in the field. That being said, if you're running all skill damage commanders, you're safe for now. Here are the 2 biggest mistakes growing players make that impede their growth in the long run. First is spending gold heads too early on niche commanders. Gold heads are extremely hard to come by, and you'll need a lot of them to expertise commanders, so they should be preserved as much as possible. Early on, you have commanders, but many do not scale to the level of Season of Conquest, potentially wasting those heads in the early game where you could save them and give you a huge leg up on the competition once you get to the Season of Conquest, or once you reach higher T4 or begin to build T5. Second is not using more than gems to your advantage. You'll need to buy books for your castle, blueprints for your buildings, and any number of items as you grow. So using more than gems and planning ahead gives you extra value from more than gems that many players miss out on or just outright forget about by not waiting or planning ahead. Buying for the future allows you to get more value now while being ready to continue your growth later. Here are 2 more of the biggest mistakes growing players make that impede their growth in the long run. First is a big one, and that's being afraid of field fighting. Field fighting is definitely easier when you have the commanders and the tech, so it feels futile to field fight with weaker commanders as your enemies have stronger ones. But field presences are necessary for your team to succeed, and even with the weaker commanders, fighting in the field brings experience that you can use once you're ready to use those expertise commanders and run around with T5, helping you solidify your positioning and coordination skills before you're thrown into the fire fully. Because believe me, T4 is a lot cheaper to heal than T5. Next is making impulse decisions. Many decisions have huge effects on how your development continues, whether it's using up a bunch of speed ups quickly to finish one research, even if you can't complete it, or changing civilizations or building and dismantling gear. There's a ton of these decisions. If you ever feel the urge to impulsively do something, just wait a day or 2 and think about it. Oftentimes that time could just give you clarity. Here are 2 more mistakes growing players tend to make that impede their growth in the long run. First is giving away their gold. Believe me, as a beneficiary of a gold donation or 2 in my time, receiving gold as T5 is nice for covering hospital costs. But that gold will be needed at some point by those growing players. Even if you aren't planning on hitting T5 in the next few months, you'll want to keep a gold reserve, as gold is harder and harder to come by the more and more you grow and the more and more you have to heal, as researches, healing costs, and building upgrades will eat into that gold, and you may find yourself short on gold quickly. Along that vein of thought, the other major mistakes players make is not maxing out resource buildings as soon as possible. Resource buildings are the single guaranteed source of resource income outside of your alliance territory resources, and pay for themselves quickly if you can get them maxed out early, after which they literally produce free resources that can easily cover the steep looking initial cost. Maxing all 4 buildings is a must, and your storehouse will thank you. Here are the 3 best daily chess commanders right now. Of the 3, we're going to start with Nevsky, and it should be an obvious one to anybody who plays Cavs. Nevsky is just too strong to not be the best choice here. The second he hit the chess rotation, he became the best daily chess commander in the game. Hands down. Next, for infantry, we have Scipio Prime. Scipio Prime is also a super solid option, as he is super viable as a support. He's got a great AoE. He's got a lot of impact on the meta, and will likely continue to be for some time because he's just got such a loaded kit. And last but certainly not least, for archers, we have Boudica Prime. Henry would be a good option here too, but Boudica Prime is a better free-to-play option that you can build more slowly. She has great survivability, really good single-target damage, and is just generally a good commander overall. Here are my recommendations of how to build cavalry pairs for 1, 2, and 3 pairs. First, if you want to just build 1 pair, I recommend Nevsky Joan. This is old school, but solid and versatile and useful for everyone. Next, for 2 marches, I recommend Nevsky Joan and Huo William. These are both super great pairs and super versatile on their own. You put them together and it's just insane. Lastly, if you want to make 3 pairings, I recommend Nevsky Joan, Huo William, and then Attila Takeda. While this is an older pairing of the 3, it is still solid, even before the relics, so it's worthwhile to potentially build if you're committing to making 3 pairings, and it's a good option that has rally implications as well if you need them.